Hey everyone. So like the video description says, we are going to be creating this mobile finance app in SwiftUI. This UI design was actually created by someone named Ghulam Rasul, and he generously gave me permission to create this in SwiftUI for the purpose of this YouTube tutorial. So thank you so much to Ghulam, and I'm going to include his social media accounts in the description of this video in case you want to look at any of his portfolios. All right, so let's just take a look at this app. What we're going to be doing today is just creating the first initial screen. We're going to be laying out the basics of our UI, and then in the next video, we're going to create some data models and populate the UI with those data models, add some animations. We're going to add some more charts and stuff like that just to make it look, make it pop a little bit, especially when users tapping around in there. But we are going to set up the basics of the UI. So we'll get started now with getting started with our SwiftUI project. We're going to create a new one, and we're going to call this our finance app. Make sure that SwiftUI is selected. We're going to save this anywhere and get ready to get started. So first of all, before we really jump into this, what I typically do is I will look at these elements and just kind of figure out how I'm going to build this. So what I would say initially is, this is kind of like the header view, I would say. This is a secondary view. This is going to be our chart. We're going to build that in Swift Charts. And then this bottom view encompasses, this little section label and these, we'll have to come up with some better names for this, but they're going to be like little selectors. You're going to tap it. It'll change colors to indicate that this is the one you're selected, and then the chart will change as well as the data. So basically, this is what it's going to look like when we're all done. We got a couple different charts here, and let's get started first off with the header view. So we'll get rid of this. What I like to do a lot is, instead of building the view code directly in the body, is I create view builder functions. So we'll call this private func home header, returning to us some view, and we're going to go back to our home header just to see what we've got here. So we've got an image. This is like the profile image or the user's avatar or something like that. It's got a stroke here with a pretty generous rounded rectangle around it. And this is not, I don't have access to any of the design files, so I don't have these assets that I can just drop in. So we're going to be creating them from code and kind of eyeballing it a little bit because we don't know the exact measurements and stuff. So we'll create this element first, then we'll create this, and then move on to the rest of the code. So in our home header here, I believe what I did was I'm going to create a grid, and that in SwiftUI allows you to create like a complex layout. I think that might be like a collection view in UIKit, but we're going to create a grid, and then we're going to create 2 by 2 or 2 by 2. So we're going to create a grid row, and we're going to have two grid rows with 2 dots, 2 circles in them. So we're going to say circle with a frame of width 3 and height 3. Now, when you create these functions, you're going to need to type them here in your body view. So we'll say home header, and this is just going to place 1 dot right there. So we're going to copy that pretty simply, paste it, and we're going to take this grid row, copy that, paste it. So I would say that's pretty close. Might not be exact, but I think for eyeballing, it's pretty good. We're going to call that good enough for now. So we are also going to create, because we've got this kind of in one section here, we're going to create an H stack, which is a horizontal stack with a spacer in between, which will push those elements as far as they can go until they hit this padding right here. So it won't hit the edge of the screen, it'll hit that padding, and then that'll kind of reach the safe space of our screen. So we'll create a H-stack, and we're going to minimize this just so we can clear that out. We're going to create a spacer, which will push those elements to the sides, and we're going to have an image. I did not put this in the project yet, but I have just like an avatar image right here. Whoops, right here. And I'm going to drop this manually into my image assets in Xcode. And now I should be able to access that in my preview view. So we'll see what I got going on. I'm using a MacBook M1, which is not the fastest. I know in Xcode doesn't get a lot of credit for being good with previews and stuff, especially in SwiftUI. So let's see, headshot. Did I spell that? Oh, I said header, headshot. So now this should load our image. Obviously, way too big. So to resize an image, we're going to say, first of all, that this is resizable, which will make it all sorts of crazy. And we're going to say an aspect ratio of fill. So that should at least make our proportions correct. And now, because we said resizable, we can give it a frame size of width 35 and height 35. Height 35. So square the image. This is not quite right just because the aspect ratio is not a square. So we're going to need to clip the sides of that. And I think I said alignment is center just to make sure it's centered when we clip it. So now we can create a clip shape. And you just saw right here, the default was a circle, but we don't want a circle. We want something called a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of, we'll just say 10. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so you can see what we got going on. Come on, M1. All right. So the Gulam has in this design, I think it looks great. I don't know if this would actually be like, there's not that much information in this app, so you would have to add a lot more to make it readable and make it make sense from a user experience point of view. But at least from the preview, it looks great. He has these very dramatic rounded corners here, especially with the stroke. So we're going to be really heavy-handed with those corner radii. We're going to add our stroke on the outside now. And to do that, we're going to say padding on the outside. You'll see our view expands. I'm going to say 10 is a little bit too, the default I think is 10. So we're going to say, let's not make it that. Let's make it a little tighter. Let's say 8. And we're going to also give it an overlay to create our stroke on the outside. We'll say rounded rectangle, matching the clip shape of our image with a corner radius of 15, a little bit larger than our image. And instead of filling it with a single color, we'll say stroke dot gray with an opacity of 0.3, so not quite full gray. And we'll just give this a line width of 1. All right, so that is what we end up with. I'd say that's pretty close. Again, it's not pixel perfect, and I know there's like some golden rule for matching, inside and outside corner radiuses, quarter radii. I don't know that rule. I probably should. If you know it, leave me a comment in the description. I'd love to learn it. But let's zoom out and zoom out that way. So that looks pretty spot on, I'd say. It's close enough. I would say maybe we could make that a little bigger, but I think it's probably fine for now. The only thing I'd want to change is that this is, kind of can't see it, but this is center aligned by default. So we're going to say alignment on our H stack, and we're going to align it by the top. So that should, if you drew a straight line, it'll fit like that. And this will go at the top of our view here when we populate more of it. But that is our home view straight away. So next we're going to create our chart. We'll say view builder, private func generate chart, returning some view. And before we can do this, there's a few things we have to do to set up. First, import charts, which is the Swift charts library. Next, we're going to create a new Swift file called, what did I call this? Chart data. And this is what we are going to loop over basically in our chart to populate these. They're called bar marks. So that's what we're going to be looping over. So we'll create a new struct and we'll call it chart data. This has to conform to both identifiable and equatable. And we'll go over that later why. Now, to conform to identifiable, it has to have a unique ID. So we'll say let ID is equal to a UUID, generate a new one. We'll say let goal title is a string, and let goal percentage is an int. And something that I like to do, especially when I'm creating these UIs from scratch, is I will create like an example of these chart datas in the struct itself. And that way I can call it very easily. I'll show you exactly where I'm going to do that, but I'll say static let example data is an, this is of type an array of our chart data. And we're going to initialize 5 of these for each of these 5 bar marks. So we can say init, we'll say goal 1, a percentage of 20%, comma. I'm going to copy that and paste it 4 times, give it a last comma. Got to change the goal title for each of these. And I'm also going to change these percentages. So I'll say 20%, 60%, 80%, 60%, 20%. So I'm just trying to match this a little bit. So that is the basis of the model for our chart. And now we're ready to start working on it. Again, we've got our view builder function called generate chart. I will say in our function, give me 1 second. We're going to say chart, and we're going to do a for each. And again, we're going to access this example data. So we can do that by calling chart data dot example data. So that's going to loop over each of those. And we'll say data in. So for each of these, we are going to do, let's see. So this actually needs to be on the outside of the closure. Data in. All right. We'll say a bar mark. And we're going to have for this one, we're going to have an X and a Y. Just for readability's sake, I'm going to separate these on separate lines. And for X, we're going to say value of our goal and the actual value of data dot goal title. For the y-axis, we're going to say a value of, what are we doing? Sales. So we'll say sales for data dot goal percentage. So we won't see anything yet because we didn't add that function to our view, but we can do that here. We'll say generate chart, and now hopefully you should see a really big, kind of ugly chart. So we can improve this by adding some view modifiers onto each bar mark and on the chart as a whole. So I'll start with the outside of the chart. Very first thing is adding a frame just to really, we don't want it that big. So we're going to add a restriction to the height. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call UI screen dot main dot bounds dot height. And now this is going to take, it's similar to geometry reader, except that this is going to take the measurement of the entire height of the screen. and I'm going to multiply this by 0.2. So basically what I'm saying is at all times, the height of this should be a minimum of, or not a minimum, but it should be 20% of the height of the screen. So as some of these as like this bottom element, if we have a smaller screen, if we have a bigger screen, like this can change dynamically, but we want this to always be the same. We don't want, if we're running out of space, we don't want to like shrink this graph. We want it to stay consistent. So that's a big change right there. We're also going to add some padding to this. We are going to change the scale. Actually, maybe we won't do the scale. Originally, I had this, we have something called chart Y scale. And you can dynamically or hard code set the range of it. So you could say, because our values were, 20 to 80, we could say, for our range, do 20 to 80. But it looked like it had a pretty good solution. Okay, it looks fine. We'll keep it like that. We'll keep it simple. We'll say also we don't want any of these. This UI is very clean, so we're going to just simplify this a little bit, and we'll say chart Y axis. Axis is hidden, and we'll do the same for the X. So we'll say chart X axis is hidden. This is wrong. We'll fix that, and we'll say yes, you are hidden. So yes, so now we've got just the empty chart itself and the bar marks. So looks a lot better, I'd say. And we're going to add a little bit more padding. You know what? So you can see here it's kind of got a lot of padding to it. We'll stick to the original design. And now we can do some view modifiers for each bar mark to kind of match this design. So again, we've got these really dramatic rounded corners. We've got these labels that are being read here on top, and we've got some different shading to each one. So underneath, within our for each, underneath our bar mark, we're going to add a few view modifiers. Foreground style, we're going to give it a color. So I'm going to say for right now, color green dot gradient. So that already right away looks better. We're going to come back to this in a second. I'm going to show you how to do a little bit more styling with this. And we want to change the shape. We want to add a lot of those corner radiuses. So we'll say clip shape for each of them. Similar to our image here, we're going to say rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 10. So this is going to clip the bottom and the top, give it that nice look that it had in the mock-up, the design mock-up file. And we need to add the percentage. It's called an annotation, so we're going to add it to the top. So we'll say annotation, and for this we're just going to have a text. We're going to basically take the data that we're passing in, percentage, and then add a little percentage symbol next to it. So I'm going to do this in quotations. Blanking on the name for this right now, but basically we can access this like that, and a percentage sign. And so there you go. We've added that. We're going to style it a little bit because it's a little bit too big. We'll say font of caption. Caption. And we'll give it a little bit of padding. So we'll say padding 3. So that looks pretty good. I'd say the last thing we need to add is modifying for each one. We're going to scale the opacity. So the higher it is, the closer to 100%, we're going to make it a little bit darker. So we'll go back to our foreground style here. Originally we had color.green.gradient. We're going to add dot opacity, and we could just say like opacity is 0.08. So that's applying the same opacity to each one. But we're going to be a little bit more creative, and instead of applying like hard coding what our opacity is going to be, we're going to say our data dot goal percentage, we're going to multiply this by 0.01. So we're going to basically scale how opaque it is based off how high the percentage is. And this is not going to work because this is an int, and it's expecting a CG float to calculate that value. So we're going to say CG float, place this within our CG float, and then multiply it by 0.01, which will give us a proper range for our opacity. So looking pretty good there. The higher it is, closer it is to 100, the darker it'll be. I think that looks pretty good. So we'll move on to the last part of the video, which is this little selector. So I think that this was kind of the only image that I was able to find on Dribbble and that I was given access to. So we're going to take some creative liberties here and just assume that, as the user taps on customers or taps on products or revenue, that the chart and the values are going to change. So we need a way to toggle like which one is currently being active and which one's being shown on screen, and then also to like replace the current chart with the revenue chart or the customer's chart. And we won't be able to do all of this today, but again, this is going to be in the next video. So if you want to, you could subscribe and watch out for that. But we're going to create just the basic UI for it so that we can plug in the data model for it and begin building, that more dynamic app experience that you would be expecting. So for this element, what we're going to do is create this first as a view builder. Then we're going to create the grid, and then we're going to create this bottom section as a whole. So we'll start with this element first. This has got a little image here, and it's got text and another text. So what we'll say is view builder, private func. What do we call this? I'm not the greatest at naming, but we'll call this, let's call it chart selector. Again, this is returning to us some view. And this is going to be a vertical stack. So we'll say VStack. Alignment needs to be in the center because it's center aligned. And we'll give it some spacing of 15. So now within this VStack, we're going to say image with a system name. So this is basically Apple has some software that you can access for free called SF Symbols, and this gives you access to all of the Apple symbols that are on all of their devices, and you can use them mostly as you want. There's some things that you can't. They're a little bit restrictive on how you can use them, but we're going to call this %. So what's nice is that you don't have to like download this icon and drag it in. You can just, if you know the name of it, I can type in %. There we go. And so now I can use it like that. So we've got our image, then we've got a text. We're going to hard code this for now, but later we're going to, again, create the model and plug it in. So we'll say 230K and font, title 3, and another text of sales. I'm trying to match this. So we'll say sales with a font of subheadline and a foreground style of gray. So we can't actually visualize this now because our preview just has the home header and the chart. I'm going to just comment this out for now and draw this manually, just so we can visualize it on screen. It looks like we need some heavier font, heavier text here. So we'll say font weight. We'll call this heavy. All right, so that looks pretty good. We just need to draw a background on it, and we'll do that. First, we'll create a frame so we can, sort of set the size. I'm going to set the max width to infinity and the max height to infinity. Hopefully we can see that. One thing I do like to do is while I'm drawing some of these views and I'm working with V-stacks and H-stacks, especially in a larger layout, I'll like to create a border of, any color just so I can visualize. We get rid of this frame here and it gets a lot smaller so you can visualize like what is actually happening to this view. So this is obviously not great because it's taking up the entire width of our screen. The way we're going to do the grid, we basically right here want to say take up as much size as we give you. So we're going to keep that for now. We're going to add a background of color.gray with an opacity of 0.1 and a corner radius of 40. We'll get rid of that border. Let's see what we're looking like now. And let's organize that a little bit better. I'm running out of battery life, so we're going to rush a little bit. So there you go. There's our view. I think that looks pretty good. We'll add more to this in the next video, but for now, I think that looks pretty good. Now we can create a grid. We're going to create a grid of 4 of those. So we are going to create a new view builder function. Call this private func create chart selector grid, returning some view. And I did experiment with like doing an actual grid like we did with that the 4 dots in the beginning, but just for the sake of this video, the solution I came up with was basically we're going to have a horizontal stack, and then within that horizontal stack, we're going to have 2 vertical stacks. And that way we can really control the spacing. So we'll say H stack, and then within that H stack, we'll say a V stack. This is why we don't do this all in the body view, because it just gets chaotic. And we're just going to say chart selector. We'll give us 2 of those. And we will get rid of that. We'll say create chart selector grid so we can visualize it. There we go. We got our V stack here. I'm going to copy this and paste it within the H stack so they're 2 side by side. Again, this is going to take up as much width and as much height as we allow it to. Now, if we look back to our document here, we can see, this is a square, but this one's longer, and this one's longer, and this one's shorter. So it kind of like has like an uneven size to them. So I'm going to do this by hand by saying frame height of 170, and I'm going to apply a height of 200 here. And now you can see like this one's a square, this one's a little bit longer. I'm going to do the same here, but reverse it. So we'll say 200 and 170. So there you go. We got this kind of like composite, blanking on the word for it, but it's kind of like this Pinterest view of these chart selectors. So that is our grid. Last thing we'll do is we need to have this section header here. So we'll create one more view builder. So the last one, I promise. Private func show our, let's just say show bottom view. And this is going to return, again, some view. In this, we'll have a V-stack with alignment of leading and a spacing of 40. We're going to say text, total sales, I think is what it was, with a font of title 3, dot bold, and we're going to have our grid of chart selectors. So create chart selector grid. We'll get rid of this again, and now say show bottom view. Right, so there's our section header. There's our selectors here, and we can now uncomment these out. We'll get the entire screen, And there's a few things that I want to change. There's some spacing issues. The first one is the spacing in between those grid selectors, or chart selectors. So I'm going to go back here. I'll say we'll just add some spacing here, right? For each of these, we'll say spacing 30 and spacing 30. We'll just keep it all very consistent. Spacing 30. So that looks a lot better to me. Last thing, in the body of our view, I'll say spacing 25. So kind of space these sections out a little bit. All right, and so there we go. There is our design. We can't do much with it. We can't click these. We can't change out any charts. We haven't added that yet. In the next video, again, we're going to create the models for some of these other elements, and we're going to add some more finishing touches, just so you can visualize, these changes as they happen, as you click them. And so stay tuned for that. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll have links to Ghulam's portfolio down below. Thank you again for letting me design this, and I hope you enjoyed watching. Have a good day.